Before we get into this episode, I would like to make a quick disclaimer that all of Society Inspired's interviews and the information we share are 100% for learning experience and to hear the different sides of the various issues we discuss. We never endorse nor support violence, and we are committed to promoting peace. I want to create a safe space for learning and comfortable place for people to be able to start to speak. Hope you enjoy. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the 19th episode of Society Inspired. My name is Gemma. I'm a 16-year-old Palestinian American teen, and I'm so excited to have Ziyaan Virji as our special guest for episode number 19. Would you like to introduce yourself, tell us your story, and also share your preferred pronouns, please?
Yeah, for sure. Thank you so much for having me, Gemma. I'm Zian. My pronouns are he, him, and my story, that's kind of long. Okay. I started my journey when I was 15. Um, I worked in the I was inspired by my mom. I was required to start up a personal project at school, and I could do anything on my choice. And I watched this documentary on Al Jazeera named India's Menstruation Man. And that was the first time I learned about menstrual health and um the fact that menstruators don't have access to products. And so um I decided to have a conversation with my mom about it, and she told me that when she was younger, she didn't have proper access to menstrual products.
Mhm.
And so for my school project, I decided to do something about it. And I won't share a lot of details right now, but it's been 6 years now. And we have um been able to work with over 20,000 people in 10 countries around the world. And because I started out my advocacy work in the menstrual health space, this opened a lot of opportunity to work with other issues, because all these issues are so intersectional. And so I've worked in mental health, education, poverty, um and climate, and so many other spaces as well. And to date, had the privilege of working with over 500,000 people through all the organizations I've been at. Yeah.
Okay. Yes, you speak and advocate for various mental health and advocacy issues. So I look forward to having you back in the future for conversations on many topics. Um, but specifically, what started your advocacy for mental health?
Yeah, I think it's I definitely have a very personal connection in terms of my own mental health journey.
Mhm.
And so I didn't mention this at the start, but before I started my own organization, I actually went through an experience of trauma, in which I lost like 3 weeks of my life as a result of dengue fever. And um that I went through this phase after I got dengue fever, in which I didn't really have a lot of control over myself, and I was acting like hypersexual and hyperactive. And 3 weeks later, I wake up in my bed and I find out that the last thing I remembered was getting discharged from the hospital, for which when I was admitted for dengue fever. And a lot of people have different theories on what happened to me. One of the theories, a psychologist at the time misdiagnosed me with bipolar disorder, and say that right before I went through dengue fever, I went through an experience of like depression.
Mm.
And because I didn't receive any help, the dengue fever kind of, I guess, sparked this thing in which, because I was so low for the longest time, I went to this phase. It was like a manic episode for 3 weeks, um, and hence diagnosed with dengue fever. And so obviously now I've gone re-diagnosed, and her diagnosis wasn't necessarily correct, but like
Yeah.
I still do agree with some of the things that she said, and I've definitely had my own journey with mental health and being an advocate. Um, I've had phases of burnout. Um, I got diagnosed I think last year with like general anxiety disorder. And
Mhm.
so I think it's super personal, and I think, like, when I reflect on mental health advocacy, I think everyone can be a mental health advocate, because everyone, goes through their own mental health journey in some form, and it doesn't have to be a diagnosed thing. It's mental health is something that everyone has,
Mhm.
right? And so um some of the stuff that I've done is I've just tried to use my platform a lot to be more authentic about my journey.
Sure.
I try to like implement, like tools and frameworks in my life and share it with others in order to take care of mental health. Coming from East Africa, like again, mental health is a very taboo topic, and it's not something you really talk about, and it's like, oh, if you're going through something, like just sleep, or like just like
Sure.
just go play a sport, or like I don't know, like um no one really talks about like potentially getting help. And if you are like going through something, you're seen as like crazy, or like um versus I feel like here in North America, I've had the privilege of, being here for like a couple of years now, and the conversations here are more normalized, and
Yeah.
almost everyone is like seeing a therapist, which is, and there are more resources accessible. And I honestly think like everyone should see a therapist. Like it's I haven't seen one myself, but from just hearing experiences of people, like I think it's amazing.
Yeah.
Um yeah.
Awesome. Well, how did starting conversations about mental health lead you to where you are today in the activism field?
I think there's an element of like one, when you're as an activist, like one thing that I've really noticed is you got to be open with your journey and like create a relationship with the community that you're building, right? And one way that I think I've been able to build community is, being super open, being a bit vulnerable about my story and what I've gone through. And so like on my podcast, I shared a lot of details on like my own mental health journey. On my Instagram, even way before, like even when I was just starting off, like I would share what I'm going through and what I'm feeling. And because that is what people relate to, like no one really cares about like your flashy ass car, or like you getting like this like new clothes, or like, but what people do relate to is like real stuff that they're going through. Um, and so sharing that has helped me build community. And also sharing it with other activists. I think we're all kind of in the same, same boat, and we're all going through our struggles. And being an activist is can be extremely lonely sometimes. And so when I started off, especially in East Africa, like I felt like I was the only one doing the work that I was doing, and didn't have people around me, and so it felt like it was me against the world all the time. But then I realized there are other folks out there, and you gotta build those relationships, and you gotta like one way to do that is being open about your mental health struggles. Um and also like I think in my journey, like because in activism a lot of the work requires you're not getting paid, it's all volunteer run, and you're fighting such big causes and taking on so much, like it does take a lot out of you, right? And so I think it was last year, or no, 2021, when I moved to Canada. So during COVID, like a lot of people took that as an opportunity to take a bit of a break and, slow things down. But my mindset during COVID, when everything was locked down, I'm like, you know what? I'm gonna double down on all the work I was doing. And I was like, I have so much more free time, like I can do so much more. And so I never really took a break. And then when I moved to Canada in February of 2021, I came here as new place, new country, new language,
Yeah.
and I came in burnt out, and it was pretty bad. Like, and it was tough, like even just getting out of bed, Um, and so I think one thing, like for a lot of activists that are listening, is to think about how can you, my mom always says you gotta fill your own cup before filling other people's cup, right?
Hmm.
And if you don't have water in your cup, like you have nothing else to fill for others. And so how do you manage to regulate yourself and find anchors in your life in order for you to feel grounded and be your 100% self when you are doing the work that you're doing. And so I work with a lot of activists, and you see like so many activists are always like canceling on meetings, or like aren't
Mm.
able to show up for themselves because they're always just so burnt out.
Yeah.
And so every time they find an opportunity to get some extra sleep, you'd see them like they'd cancel on a meeting, or like, they wouldn't be able to show up. And um that's not how things should work, obviously, right? And but what can you do when the activists you like a lot of activists are running on an empty tank, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. You mentioned your podcast, but what motivated you to start the Leaders of Today podcast?
Yeah. I think so I tell people that Leaders of Today is like a gift to my 15-year-old self.
Mm.
Um when I started off my activism journey, it was really hard to see, um especially on like social media and the content out there. Like, it was hard to access content or see content of people that were doing the same things that I was passionate about. And I mentioned like it was hard to find community. And then also, like, when you do start off, like, how do you get access to like resources and opportunities? It's extremely hard when you're starting off. And so Leaders of Today is addressing that challenge of like a lot of people do have a passion and do want to start something, but just don't know where to start, right? And they feel like if they do it, they'll be the only ones doing it. Like, they have to create an unconventional path for themselves. And so the podcast is an opportunity to, one, provide content, to see that, you know what, like, there's other young people doing super cool stuff out there. And if they can do it, you can do it too. And they've taken unconventional paths. Second thing is, providing resources and opportunities for people. And we do that through, our newsletter and things of that sort. And then lastly, it's creating a sense of community. And that's something I'm trying to build. Like, how do we create a community of leaders of today that are doing cool stuff, no matter in health, in activism, business, artists, whoever it may be. Like, how do young people come together and work together to create some progress? And so that is what inspired me to start my podcast. It's called Leaders of Today because as young people, we're often called leaders of tomorrow. And my grade 3 teacher used to tell me that tomorrow never comes.
Yeah.
And she used to say that when I used to submit my homework late. And so um I was like, we're called leaders of tomorrow, but tomorrow never comes. So as young people, we're not only leaders of tomorrow, but we're leaders of today. And that's why it's called Leaders of Today.
Awesome. Looking toward the future of healthcare slash mental health care, what is some encouragement you could share with the Gen Z kids to find their purpose?
I think it's important to do the work and start with why. And I usually refer to this really good framework. I'm not sure if you know what Ikigai is. But it's this Japanese concept that so it's spelled Ikigai, and it's a Japanese concept that research has proven one reason why the Japanese have long lives is because they have ikigai. And what it is it's a combination. So think of it as a Venn diagram, and so it's a combination of what you're good at, what you can make money with, what are you passionate about, and what you want to give back to the world. What is your mission? And if you put all of that in the middle, that is your purpose and that is your why.
Hmm.
And so I'm sure if you check it out online, there's like guiding questions that can help you fill out all those Venn diagrams. And when you do that and then you look at the middle, you'll be able to see a pattern of something that aligns with all of them.
Yeah.
And that is one way to find your why. And so I highly recommend people to check that out. And the reason why I say it's important to start with why, because um you know a lot of people live their whole lives just kind of going with the flow
Hmm.
and following what society tells them to, pun intended with your podcast. But like it's the conventional. Like if I do have an idea, you know what, I'll start it after I'm done with high school. And then you go to university, like I'll start it after university, and then you get your first job, and like I'll start it when I'm promoted to a senior level and I have more time. And by the time you know it, you're like retired and you're on your deathbed, and you have a whole family, and you have all these regrets. And so if you do start with why, you know what you're working towards. And
Okay.
then one of my favorite quotes is, the energy is in the purpose, not the plan. And so if you have purpose, the plan just kind of comes on its own, right? Because and I've been able to experience that. When I went through that experience of trauma, that helped me figure out what my why was. And it's crazy how everything else after that just kind of aligns, and the universe just blesses you with things. And so a lot of people, like, they go chasing after, like, when you're in high school, you're trying to get into a good university, or get a good scholarship, right?
Yeah.
Or people are trying, like in activism, I see a lot of people trying to like run after all these awards and all these accolades. And I think if you focus a lot on some of those materialistic things when you're a bit older, you're chasing after money. um and a lot of time when you go chasing after that, there's one of two scenarios. One, most people that run too much after it will not get it. Um, Two, if you do get it, you will have it, but you won't be fulfilled and you'll just be unhappy because your whole life will be catered around that thing, right?
Yeah.
Be it money, be it an award, be it a scholarship.
Hmm.
Whereas if you start with why, no matter what you do, right? Like even if you do get an opportunity or you don't, you're gonna always be 100% fulfilled, and you're working towards what you want. And it's crazy when you do that, all these things come on themselves. And for me, like, I've been so privileged. I was so focused on impact and doing the work that I want to do. Won a bunch of awards, gotten a full ride scholarship to come to university, like, had all these opportunities. And it's not something I intentionally just chased after. It was sort of a sub product of everything that I do. So that is why I really encourage like young people to focus on why. Yeah.
Okay. Switching topics a bit, what are some challenges you faced as an activist founder, building from the ground up?
Yeah. I think there were a lot. I didn't mention some of them in terms of, building a sense of community. Sometimes it's being super lonely, getting access to resources as a young person.
Mm.
Um, a lot of other ones include, like systematically, especially in the context that I grew up in, like legally, like you're not even allowed to register an organization until you're 18 years old. And so if you start off as a 15-year-old, like how are you meant to carry out any projects from a legal perspective? You know what I mean? So that's one. A lot of times I would be the youngest person in a room, be it in conferences, be it in events, be it in board meetings, right? And so yes, it would be nice to have a seat on the table and be in those rooms as the youngest person. But that also means like you're treated as a young person when you're there. And that's such a weird feeling because, you're like all proud, like you have space on the table, but then you can't really voice your opinions. And even if you do, they're treated as like a young person versus treated as like, someone that's saying something legit. um, and
Yeah.
so like something I remember was like I was in a board meeting, I was part of this board, and I was the youngest person in there, and the chair of the board was like, I had an opinion that was different from what the rest of the board thought. And so I obviously voiced it, and I thought this is the way we need to do stuff.
Mhm.
And the chair of the board like caught feelings and was like, how can like Ziyaan like say that, like he doesn't have any respect towards me, like. And it wasn't anything personal, like it was more so about like a strategic like issue that we were talking about, you know what I mean? And so things like that have happened a lot as an activist. And but I still do think if I wasn't young and I wasn't a guy working in the menstrual health space, like I wouldn't have had the opportunities that I did have, because I do bring a different perspective to it.
Yeah.
And so now I think of being young as like an advantage, and like using it to my power, like be that only young person in the room, and once you're then just try to take up as much space as you can. right? And do your research and do the work to show that everything that you say is like legit and isn't just like a lot of people like, this like activists are just like making noise, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
But we're not like, yes, we're making noise, but we're also like trying to work towards like better solutions, right?
Yes.
And so that was one of the challenges. I would say, again, mental health being a big one as well, and then also just working in menstrual health. um Again, super taboo topic.
Yeah.
A lot of the times, like, my friends would make fun of me. I would also go into like communities, and a lot of people would be uncomfortable having conversations, and so it'd be super hard to carry out our workshops. I remember a time we were hosting a session with like a group of parents, right? At a school, and the parents, like the dads in the room, whilst I when I started talking about menstrual health and periods, like the dads in the room like just stood up and right in front of me and just left the room.
Wow.
And I've had so many like iterations of that experience. And so yeah, like facing those kind of challenges that are on a society level where you can't do much is interesting, but I think those just keep me going, It's like I'm
Yeah.
like, that just shows how much more work we need to do.
That's
Um and yeah, I think that those were a couple. Yeah.
well, wow. Adding on to that, what is some advice for activists that want to start their own podcast or campaign, even at a young age?
Yeah, I think one, like not letting your age define you. Like, if anything, use your age to your advantage, as I mentioned. Like being young, like that's your like one biggest selling point at the start when you have nothing, right? Like now there's being more, like when I started, I think things were a little bit more different, and but we have really changed. Like people are starting to see, the power of Gen Z, the power of like this new generation, the power of social media, things of that sort. And so my biggest advice would be, first figure out what that why is. Once you do figure that out and you put in that work, and it's not gonna come over time, it's not gonna come overnight, sorry, it's gonna come over time. Um and so be intentional about that all times. And then try not to reinvent the wheel. Like a lot of the times we wanna be the first ones to do this, but in reality, like been years and years of activists that have done the same stuff, you know what I mean? And so instead of trying to reinvent the wheel, how do you talk to the people that have paved this path for you and
Yeah.
then build on top of them? And
Mhm.
like there's a quote of like, I think like great people stand on the shoulders of like, people that have been there before them. And so how do you stand on the shoulders of the people that have already done this good work and build on top of them?
Yeah.
I think that's super important. And then lastly, like use the times that we're living in to your advantage. The fact that we have access to incredible technology. We live in the time of AI, which is like a crazy ass space right now, and so much is happening. And so as activists, like how do you use AI to your advantage versus using AI to, for destruction? Um Use social media like to your advantage. Like we've all seen the power of TikTok and Instagram, and all these different platforms. And so how do you use that? Like when I started, just document everything that you're doing online, and you'd be surprised, like people love that stuff. And in the process of doing that, you're gonna find like people that will support you and people that will help you through your journey. um and then lastly, just go for it. Like just start. Tomorrow never comes, as I mentioned.
Mhm.
um yeah, and so don't wait until tomorrow. Don't wait for someone to like tell you this is the right time to start. If you have an idea, just start. Just put it down on paper, actualize it, and then kind of go from there.
Yeah. I want to add on to that because I I came up with Society Inspired. I got the idea that I wanted to do something like this at the end of 2020, I think it was. And I kind of just sat on it for 8 months. It was 8 months before I actually like put it out on the internet. But I was scared because I'm at the time I was 14. I think I was 14. And I was terrified of what people would think. I just thought that it wouldn't work because people wouldn't take their time to sit down and talk to me because of how young I was.
Yeah.
And so it came to the point of me talking to my friends like, "Hey, can you help me?" my friends that are adults, like, can you help me build this to show like, yes, I know I can know as much as you do. Like we can talk about this. And I think even since then, the power of Gen Z on social media, especially like TikTok, has grown so much and people are like starting to really listen. Cause I feel like if I were to be starting it now versus then, I would have less fear now than I did then. So I definitely feel like there has been some progress, but I relate to all the younger age stuff that you were saying.
Yeah, no, you see, and like what you're like 14, like think about that. Like, what are other 14-year-olds doing? You know what I mean? Like, I
Yeah,
don't know, like, and you can still be a 14-year-old and still do good work. And I think everyone should do good work. And I'm sure you've had so much impact from these conversations that you've had. And so yeah, don't, as you mentioned, like don't let your age like be a barrier, instead use it to your advantage.
yeah,
And one thing that you did was super important is you talked to people that have been in the same shoes as you have before,
yeah,
and helped that have helped you like guide you and whatever. Because if you try to do it all alone, like I know like North American culture, like it's super individualistic.
yes.
And like everyone, like at the back of our heads we are taught this narrative of you have to do everything on your own.
Mhm.
But in reality, like if you invest in community, and I say, like build on top of what's already being done, I think you're gonna save so much time and energy, and it's gonna be even way easier. You know what I mean?
Yes. Well, are there any resources you would like my followers and I to read, watch, or listen to?
There's a lot. I could go on all day, but a couple things I would recommend. One, a TED Talk that really changed my life in terms of activism is, it's called "Want to Help Someone? Shut Up and Listen." And the idea around that is, a lot of times as activists we assume that there's a specific problem, but in reality the problem's completely different.
Mhm.
And so how do you spend the time to listen to the community that you're working with to address that issue? Highly recommend watching that TED Talk. Second one, a framework, especially for mental well-being, that I one of my professors and teachers helped me uh with this, is there's this idea of, as activists or as anyone in positions of authority, um a lot of the times, most of us don't have anchors in our life. And the way to find an anchor is this rule of three P's.
Mhm.
And so the first P is people. And so ask yourself, who are the people in your life that you can talk to and will have unconditionally your best interests in mind, both consciously and subconsciously? A lot of the times, and research shows, especially for Gen Z, people don't even have one person that they can talk to, right? And so, which is super sad, right? Considering the mental health crisis. Imagine in a world of like almost 8 billion people, you can't find one person that you can talk to. And he works with a lot of like, he's a leadership coach. So he works with heads of states and CEOs of companies, and they face the same issue.
Wow.
So first P, people. Second P, practices. So ask yourself, what are the practices in your day-to-day life that you can do that can make you feel like you're anchoring yourself? So for some people, it's going to the gym. For some people, it's meditation. For some people, it's journaling. For me, it's like praying and going to the mosque. And so think about what are the everyday practices that you can do that every time you feel like you're not anchored, you can feel a sense of anchor.
Okay.
And then lastly, places. What is the everyday places that are accessible to you that you can go to for the same reason, right? And so we mentioned the gym, I mentioned the mosque. It could be a specific like corner in your house. It could be a park. It could be a beach that you go to. But having those three P's will really help you like anchor yourself. And once you have that, like you're unstoppable. And especially even with your like mental health issues that you'd be facing, this is a great solution to do that.
Mhm.
One of the practices could be like, go seeing a therapist and people as well. And so again, therapy doesn't work for everyone. And but if you have these three P's, like that's a potential solution or framework.
Yeah.
And then last thing I would say, as a resource, there's this really cool podcast. It's called Leaders of Today. You should definitely check it out. I think we have amazing conversations as well, and I highly recommend people to subscribe to our newsletter because we share like so many opportunities, like scholarships, conferences. We have a list of 100 plus like active ones, and so highly recommend people checking that out. It's as if they want to start off as an activist, there's a lot of tools there. And then last thing I would say is people should leave a review on your podcast. um that will really help you uh help bring some of these conversations to life.
Yeah.
And reviews really help. So if you're listening to this, stop what you're doing and leave a review on this podcast. Make sure you give a 5 star. I think it'd be super helpful. Yeah.
Thank you. And where can my followers find you on social media so they can keep up with you?
Yeah, so you can follow me on Instagram or any other platform at Ziyaan Virji. That is spelled ZIYAANVIRJI. And for our podcast, just Leaders of Today Pod, or Leaders of Today on everywhere you get your podcasts or any social media.
Cool. All of that will be linked down below. So just go there. Okay, well, thank you for taking the time, whoa, my words, to do this interview. And I look forward to having you back in the future. Make sure you follow Ziyaan on all social media platforms and check out his podcast. Make sure to follow our other social media platforms as well so you don't miss out on more interviews and important information. I hope you enjoyed the 19th episode of Society Inspired, and we will see you guys next time.